Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back.
And so I talked to a whole bunch of Chinese experts.
Hope you enjoyed the lunch and feeling recharged, ready for our next session. And also a welcome to all of those joining us now for the second half of the first day of our conference. Just a few reminders. We'll be sticking very close to the time frame laid out in your programs because we have a very full program. We want to make sure we can get through everything on time. Throughout the sessions, there will be refreshments in the same place where we had our breakfast and lunch, so please feel free if you need that. And I'd also like to ask that everyone hold on to their binders, the packages and programs you received when you registered for tomorrow, if you'll be here tomorrow, because we won't be giving them again tomorrow, so please hold on to those. All right, so earlier in the day, we got to hear, we got a broad overview of the crisis, some background information, and in this session we'll be digging a little deeper into ways we can address the crisis. So we'll be getting a taste of the action that our conference wants to highlight and then build upon. I won't go into details about our panelists. All of that information is in your programs, but I would like to note one change. One of our panelists, unfortunately, won't be able to join us. So we're joined today by Ms. Leah Zanola from the International Labor Organization and Mr. Dick May from American Working Capital. They'll be responding to Dr. Richard Freeman's presentation, who joins us today from Harvard University and the National Bureau of Economic Research. So I'd like to ask Dr. Freeman to join us and start us off with his presentation. Thank you.
Okay. How does this work? This one? Key thing. This one. Okay. We see what we're. This is what I want to discuss, and I called it Beyond Bandages, because I think without a real plan and job creation and for economic recovery, and if everything's going to be just sort of do what you can in little ways, it's going to go on for ad infinitum. I'll be very brief about the first part, just because everybody knows the status and what's happened and so forth. And then I'm going to talk about three areas of solutions, or steps towards solutions. And I think that the way to think about them is, if you don't have jobs and you've got people, what do? You can either send the people out so they go to somewhere else where there are jobs, reduces your people. You bring customers in, and that's tourism. That's it's export, but it's export inside the country. And that's what I'm going to talk a lot about, because I think that is the natural industry to focus very sharply on. I mean, Jeff Sachs said, well, don't focus on one, though he mentioned tourism as one of the ones that he said 5 or 6, but he didn't mention, I think agriculture was the other one I think he said. But I'm going to stick to the tourist one to be very specific. And then it's a question of getting capital in is another aspect, and I'm going to talk a little bit about giving workers a stake in the firms so that they have their capital in place. This is particularly for small and medium enterprises. Okay, so I'm going to there's a big problem. Slides over, because you heard it, etc. You haven't seen the pictures of the leeches, but to me it was unbelievable the policies that the European Union and the IMF have imposed. Squeezing governments and so on may have made good sense, but you better have another way to spur the private sector, or else you just end up in what could be years and years of et cetera. So this alternativlos, there was nothing else you can do. Well, I don't know how many years into the future you start looking, and I think a number of other people just made it very clear early on. that if you're going to be extracting 5% of the GDP and expecting with these debt rates, there has to be an alternative, or else the whole thing doesn't go. That's okay. I also want to point out something which also came up earlier, which is I think a disgrace for the whole European Union. And this is from the IMF. And this is just the complete breakdown of the European capital market. So it isn't just that Europe as a unit has broken, its labor market is in tatters, with some countries having huge unemployment rates, et cetera. The capital market. And you just read this, and it's all about the credit channels, which we've heard earlier today, being broken. And they go on and they give some, I didn't give some of the details in there, I didn't give any of the details in their report, I just give a little summary. But they're talking about the interest rates for getting some credit in Portugal, in Spain, in Greece, compared to in Germany or Holland. And you can't compete as a small business if you're in a European setting, if you're paying more for the same thing, and you could be just as good a business, or you could be a 5 or 10% better business, but if you're still paying for these more rates. And I keep thinking that, what would happen in the US if the people in Massachusetts were having to pay twice the interest rates of the people in New York? It's just not a doable. So in some sense, the European Union should look at itself and say, wait a minute, you don't have a single labor market. You don't have a single capital market. You've not even tried to rescue your capital market. You do have rights for people to move, so in that sense, this is possible. But this is terrible. And then they've used the crisis to destroy labor institutions, and so on. Okay, so then I have some pictures of some happy Greeks. I suppose these fit with the unhappy people. This is all from 2014. So this is just this year when there's not been violent things and so on. And so we have a crisis. Okay. And that's sort of my introduction to the situation. But you've heard that. So I think that I focus here on the second point. It's a small country. They depend on the global economy, and they do depend on the EU. And the notion is that a small country locked in by the global things and the EU has very little degrees of freedom to operate. But I think there is some places where being small can let the country move more agilely. And what is critical is that a small change in policy that actually succeeds, and I'll define small carefully. If Greece were to create 700,000 jobs in a period of time, that would be huge for Greece. That would be measure error in China. And we'll come back to that because China is the growing tourist nation. And it means a small extra share of the Chinese tourist market going to Greece won't create 700,000 jobs, but it'll create a sizable number of jobs. So a few smart things that are affecting much bigger partners out there. And it could be in the EU, it could be China, where else in the global economy, can really pay off. And then my one sort of semi-theoretical comment is about if you are targeting areas, and I agree, one has to be very thoughtful in targeting. And the smaller you are, the more you have to be thoughtful, I think, in targeting stuff. It's areas that have large spillovers to the rest of the economy. That means when that area grows, a lot of the purchases of goods are made domestic economy, and if you look forward, the people who were hired by that things will be buying in the local area, and so you get a nice it's an input-output table type of analysis. And then I said best to prioritize for places, and I came up with tourism as my case, and that's what I want to be selling you. Now I have one additional slide before I get to the tourism. I thought initially that actually Alan was going to talk more of this, but so some of this came up at the end of his discussion. One thing is a policy of moving people out of the country, a government policy that sending our people overseas. I understand that's been done in different European countries at different times to encourage people to if there are no jobs in Greece, better a young person go to some other country, and maybe there should be some government programs to think about that. So I just gave some of the figures here, and of course the Irish were famous that people leave, and then when Ireland recovers, a lot of young people come back, and then you do see here that indeed the Greeks are doing this already. So moving people out should be thought, should be something one thinks carefully about how to do it, how to get remittances back. It is also true for exports that when people go and live in another country, they tend to still want some of their home products. They know their home industries. I can imagine if people are leaving Greece for somewhere else, that somewhere one gives them a whole big sheet of things. These are Greek companies who have products that could be exported to wherever you're going, Somewhere one could think about that. Okay, now I'm going to focus on the tourism, which will be the bulk of my presentation. First, the tourism is a giant industry. I haven't done this calculation recently. I did it a number of years ago. Tourism was a bigger generator of foreign currency than the oil industry, petroleum. It's either first or second usually. I'll bet it's first now, but I didn't look at petroleum data. Second, it's a genuine outside demand shock. This is not the government doing something. The tourists come in, and it's about as good as, in terms of technical economics, an exogenous shock you could have to the domestic economy. That's why people like exports. It's the same thing. It's growing massively, and these are all the figures there from. These are all World Tourist Organization, which is a UN operation, and those are the various estimates. So it's big. It's a huge sector. Okay. Now, where does it sit in the Greek economy? It's a huge sector too, and we'll talk about three different kinds of jobs. 2012 was a really bad year, and I've got some figures updated to 2013 because there's been a decline, but it still was 8.8% of total employment. And then you see the figures over for the GDP, and it's a smaller fraction of GDP than it is of employment, and that means that it's a job creator in the sense of it's got high labor to output ratio would be another way of phrasing it. And it has huge links to the rest of the economy, which is the other part that you want to have. And so here I've got some figures about direct and indirect and what they induced. Basically, and this is the GDP, and then I'll show you in a minute to employment. It's a tourist is. Let me phrase it this way. Sometimes these are economic impact studies where they do for different sectors. Sometimes they're really not to be trusted. And they're not to be trusted often if I tell you that I want to build a huge stadium in New York and I do an impact study and I tell you this is the direct and this is the indirect and you just give money to me, whatever the athletic thing is, we're going to create lots of jobs. The reason it's sometimes it's bogus or partially bogus there is you could have given money to the government or somebody. You could have put the money in some other industry. You really got to compare it, the counterfactual. But tourism is from outside. There is no reduction in demand in Greece for anything if you do tourism. So tourism is the one of the few industries where this kind of analysis, if you're taking a global perspective, you might say, their tourists are coming to Greece and they're not going to Portugal. So the world economy is in a different situation, but we're talking about Greece and one country. So there you see the estimates. Direct, the indirect is backwards through the supply chain, and the induced is forward spending basically by people or et cetera. Now, let's go to so here I have the employment figures, and you do see it gets up to in 2013, it was up to 19% or so of the of employment. Again, direct, indirect, et cetera. So it's a very attached part, and if you're looking for a place to have an impact with a policy, that's where you, in my view, you should look at. Okay. So then we did some calculations to try to say, well, how many jobs and this and that, and the number that I found very cheap and easy to use is that for every 20 tourists who come in under the current normal stay period that tourists do, you get one job. So you could kind of, that's not what's the right word? It's not a, there can be much more sophisticated analysis to do that. It's like a fixed input-output coefficient. It's not based on marginal calculations and so on. But it turns out it looks like it works. And then this is Mr. Andri Ennis, who's I think head of the Greek tourist. Yes, tourist. Yes. And he had an estimate that was a little higher than mine of some of this, but it also, the 20-to-1 number comes out of his thing as well as the calculations we did. This is all a big deal. 2013 has had a big recovery, and et cetera. And then I point out, mostly European tourists. But we're going to push for a market outside, which is the Chinese tourists, which I just think it's a perfect time to move into. So now going to go to Chinese tourism to take you to who we want to bring in or who you might want to. First of all, it's a really tiny part of the Greek tourist industry at this point. Our estimate in the official, some of the official Greek data, they don't ever report Chinese. It's lumped with a bunch of other countries because it's so small. But we found a number someplace, and so someone has a better one. That's great. And so you see very small number coming, and Chinese tourists. I believe, at least as of last week, there were no direct flights between Athens and Beijing, and I think there have been some discussions to do that. So then I said in the middle there, you see that it's if Greece maintains its current Chinese tourist market share, Chinese tourists will create there'll be 9,000 new jobs by 2020. That's not much. So you immediately say, here's the biggest growing sector. You really have to make a campaign to raise your presence and do that. So at the bottom it was need a strategy to attract more Chinese tourists. And let's see what we say next for this. Okay, this is why you want to have a strategy for them. They're number one. Not only are they number one in international tourism, they spend money like mad. So one of my friends said at one point she was selling things in Geneva, and she said the Chinese tourists would come into the luxury shop where she was selling, and they would just basically take wheelbarrows of expensive things because this is a very nouveau riche, and they're out there spending lots of money, and bang. They beat out the Americans, they beat out the Germans, they spend more than anybody. And at the bottom I have the UN World Tourist Organization, in case you think I may be exaggerating the Chinese stuff, this is their statement. And that's where actually the figures, they're beating out the two, US and the Germans. And I don't know if this is true in the other countries, but in the US, Chinese tourists spend more per person than any other group. So maybe if we had somebody from the Monaco or something like that, it might have been higher. But for the countries that matter, okay. And now this is the projection for the Chinese outbound travel from 2017. This is amazing. I mean, this is a market that is just exploding. to this. Chinese government is encouraging people. They're doing everything they can to have people go out and be tourists. Because they have to get rid of the currency. They sell us all the goods, and they got to do something in the trade situation. And tourism looks like that's the one they love. Now, these are Chinese luxury tourists, and where do they go? And you look down the list, Chinese luxury traveler 2013, and you say, oh, France, Paris, that's where the U.S., Singapore, Switzerland is very attractive. We don't see Greece. We see the Maldives Islands. And so if I was involved in decisions, I would be sitting there saying, okay, we've got to go for being in the top 20, the top 10. The program has got to be to where Greece is a popular site, particularly popular site here. Then the understanding of how much money they spend, which is also, you see, what's the booking considerations? This is now the upper tier of the Chinese, they're called luxury travelers. It's shopping. And everybody I talk to all my Chinese students, I say, well, what do you want to do when you go to a country? We want to go to the airport and buy stuff. That's great. But luckily for Greece, culture is too. Because that's, you got the mixture of these things. And you have the beaches and so on and so forth. And then you say your students tell you this. Well, global tax-free shopping, this is actual from a survey, not from asking students. And you see they beat out the Russians even in this kind of thing, and et cetera. Okay, so we have that. So now we come to what is the Chinese tourism into Greece. And Greece, I already gave you the figures, showed just a very small number. Well, one thing is you cannot, I suppose, as of now, fly directly from Beijing to. So you have to fly, stop somewhere else, and then you go on. And they got 21,000 people who the statistics estimate did decide to. They got on a different airplane wherever they landed and went directly to Greece. But a lot of the tourism is, of course, it's traveling around Europe in different places. And then we say, I thought this was pretty good. The Chinese, they actually all they want to do is breathe clean air. And that's really important to them. And I can't imagine any place that would have better air than the Greek islands, and et cetera. Okay, here it comes. Profiling the Chinese global tourist, fresh air. So, and escaping overcrowding. And then they want to go exotic places. This is coming from Chinese tourist experts. So it's not that I've gone out and interviewed lots of, my students I can interview. I can't interview lots of Chinese tourists in the street. You find a lot in New York. You could interview them there. And then the way these tourist guys like thinking about is the different kinds of tourists. So you market for different groups. And so there's one here speaking of the experienced people, the mass travelers, the affluent ones. Tier 1 city would be maybe a city that is got 20 million people. And the magnitudes are really important. A tier 2 city might be 10 million people. So in China, Greece might be the whole country would be a tier 2 city. New York is in between tier 2 and tier 3 in the kind of city break. So this is just giant sets of things. Okay, next. Something more about the where they like to go, which islands they like to go. In order to get an idea, I wanted to give a successful place that is targeting the Chinese tourists. It is just starting this. I'm going to give you in a minute. Oh, I've got this strategy. This strategy comes from looking over what the state of Hawaii is now doing. Hawaii is now targeting Chinese tourists. And they had virtually none 5 years ago, and they're shooting for, and that's, I think Greece should be in the same business of sitting there and saying, we target these guys. First thing is you have to get things in Chinese. Chinese guys don't like cheese. and they like to have Chinese breakfasts, and they like to have this and that, and you have to have the hotels and people. It's got to be a plan to do this. Easy access to historic sites, name brand shopping, yes, and then the logistics. I know the government is negotiating something to try to get direct flights from Beijing to Athens. That would be, I think, extraordinarily helpful. It says variations in trips. Well, that's targeting the different groups. I mean, if you could, sell a couple of islands to some Chinese billionaires, that might have some virtue. But then there's going to be a lot of school teachers. There are a lot of young people. It's a varied thing, and it's got to be sort of friendly to the Chinese at each of the levels. So you attract these different people. And then at the bottom is, and I think this is extremely important. The Chinese tourist industry is just growing by leaps and bounds because you saw the numbers that they're expecting to have a fourfold increase, hundreds of it's just gigantic numbers. So one needs a presence there to where there's a real strong Greek presence. When I'm a Chinese tourist guy and somebody's saying to me, where should I go for an exotic European thing, but I want a little culture too, and I want this and I want that, you want somebody to say, here's the Greek offering, here it is, ... And then using these social media and other places to sort of raise. It's got a very serious campaign, as far as I can see. And so here's what Hawaii is doing. And we called it here, they're Chinifying their tourism. And if you go to Hawaii, and maybe somebody's recently been to Hawaii, you will see an extraordinary number of Asian tourists. Hawaii is just loaded. Japanese being the wealthiest and the longest, but the Chinese are just zooming along. And so here you see the numbers. And with their strategy, they're they got twice as many people coming into Chinese people coming to Hawaii as to Greece. Hawaii is not as big as Greece and doesn't offer doesn't offer the culture, doesn't offer a lot of the more varied tourism you would get in a country. And they've been really working with signs in the streets. They're in Japanese and now they're coming up in Chinese. So you feel comfortable. There's the spending numbers at the bottom. The Chinese spend the most per day, but there are many more Japanese still coming in. The Japanese is the money. That's okay. So this is a little bit about their strategy, and I'll just say just briefly. Yeah, they try to get more people to stay for a week. And you can imagine in Greece, if your strategy might be something where you say, okay, you come to Greece for this period of time, and then you go to Paris, or it's the reverse, and you offer different kinds of packages. Somebody said earlier about the East European connections and the Middle East connections. You could think about having how do we work that business so people have a stopover in Athens for some culture, and then go on to wherever they're going on elsewhere in the Mideast, etc. So okay, so that's my tourist thing. It's the big market is there. Nobody's nailed down those Chinese. It's a complete opening thing. Hawaii is working on it. I'm sure lots of other people are, and I've seen enough things in the thing about Greece to know it's on people's minds. But boy, I would make it a real target and have maybe there is the tourist minister. She had to go. She'll come back and tell us some more later. She had to go to I think a CNN interview at this moment. But I would do if I were an important person in the government, I would have a real targeted government thing with goals and so on, and work with the tourist industry. Okay, the last thing, which I'm going to just say a little bit about, because I think Dick May is an expert in this terrain, and discuss it. And this is, how do you deal with getting some capital into these small and medium enterprises when they're squeezed by credit. And you kind of could say, oh, gee, we should wait till the banking system decides it's going to do this. And I think that's waiting till hell freezes over. And so when the scheme that I find at least attractive for thinking about is trying to get workers involved in some ownership stake. In the U.S., we do much more of this than almost any other country, where workers in small and medium enterprises have a capital stake in their firm. And when Greece went through the 25% wage cuts, I would have tried to say, okay, yeah, we take that, we take that, but the workers have to have some stake in the company, so when the profits come back, that then their incomes naturally go up. We don't end up in a delayed process there. And so I just discussed the benefits of having workers having a stake. We have a lot of evidence that leads to more productivity, lower turnover, more commitment, and it doesn't have to be that big a stake. And then I put the one that I think is critical now, is she's going to give me the thing saying I've got, that's perfect. This is the last line, I think. Me one more. And then I gave you just examples, because it's very important to understand there are companies in the world who have, Mondragon had some problems with their investments in France. You may remember Mondragon being the Spanish-owned. But John Lewis, which is the British-owned, worker-owned retailer and now food grocery, every year of this recession, they gave their workers 2,000 to 4,000 pounds bonuses as their profit shares. They have surpassed Marks and Spencer. And if you live in London or Britain, you know that you want to go is you shop in John Lewis. And now, even though it's a bit pricey, you go to the Waitrose, which is the John Lewis supermarkets. And their workers are really, it's very important. If you tourists, you want the workers to be real friendly to the tourists. Because the people will come back because, oh, they had such a friendly, pleasant experience, and people are real nice. When workers have some stake in the company or the hotel, that makes them more friendly, and they understand that. So I give those examples, and then I conclude just on time. You need I said multi-pronged job creation, and it can't just be bandages. And for the foundation, the extent to which your programs are nice bandages, that's somehow not going to shake it up the way it should. And I said one part, I was very modest here, in the sense of just said one part of a program should be tourism. It isn't the only thing, but it's a very focused stuff. And another part should be to help these small and medium enterprises. And I think there's this great overlap where the tourist sector, where you have to have people be friendly to the to the people who are coming, that you want to do that. And then I put the encouraging migration, which unfortunately fell between Alan and me.
Thank you, Dr. Freeman. Thank you very much, Dr. Freeman. We'll be hearing now from Dick May from the American Working Capital.
Okay, I'll go with this. I don't like the lights. Yeah, let's hear it.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity to share a little bit of wisdom, and I have just a little. I'm not an academic. I'm basically an empiricist, a capital fellows that look to get efficient returns on capital. But I'm here to tell you about an idea that I've shared with Richard, and we've worked on it for some period of time, and that is, if you want to implement an idea like Richard's, what I would tell you is don't be patient. Basically, go get some capital and do it. The good news about the selected industry area is that it's a service-based business, which means that it's usually made up of very small SME businesses. They are usually valued at a low level, 4 to 5 times EBITDA, and therefore, and they also trade frequently. There's turnover in these businesses in terms of their ownership. So that what I would say the corollary to this is if this is a good idea, the way to implement it is to go buy a business that's in this business and then re-engineer and redirect the business to expand in this. It doesn't have to be a Greek business. It could be a US-based business or UK business or what have you that's in the area of planning and trip planning and so forth that has the infrastructure and the institutional knowledge of how to do this and just redirect it into this area. That's what I would do. And if I were a foundation, rather than giving money to some people to study this, I would say, as I was saying at lunch, let's set aside some money and go buy one of these businesses. You don't have to control it. There's a structure that I'll talk about in a second so that people don't have to say, well, what are you going to get out of that? And the ownership model that I would recommend, if you were going to rebuild businesses which have to be done in Greece, and we think they have to be done in the US, there's about a $5 trillion turnover going on in the US of closely held businesses. As you probably know, about 50% of the gross domestic product of the US is from privately held businesses, a couple of million of them. And they're privately owned, and they are about $5 trillion worth of those assets will turn over in the next 5 years as forecast by the ownership of that business. And so there is a very active model in this country that is probably not well known and maybe underappreciated in other parts of the world, but an employee-owned model that has been supported by government policies since 1974. And there's about $1 trillion of assets held in trusts for employees that own their businesses. There's about 11,000 of these businesses that are a majority or very significantly owned by their employees. Some of them are very well known. Some of them are public companies that have significant employee ownership, like Apple, Google, Microsoft, and so forth. And they own them through stock purchase plans. There's a whole group of private companies that in certain cases we've worked with and helped institute that 100% of the company is owned in a trust by the employees. And what I would tell you is, why is that an interesting model today for Greece? And that is because one of the good things that Alan and Jeffrey talked about earlier is that all the evidence that's out there is that the wages that are being paid, the percentage of total value or wealth being created in an economy, a lower and lower percentage of it is being paid out in wages. And a larger and larger percentage is return on capital, both intellectual and operating capital, the assets deployed. The employee ownership model, which was really, as I say, introduced here in 1974, it existed before that, but was formally recognized as an ownership model under the tax structure in this country, matches a labor wage with a capital wage, so that every worker in the company, in an individual employee-owned business, participates in the capital appreciation. The thing that's quite interesting about that statistic from the economist standpoint is, if you look at a business and you know its return on capital and you know the wages which are set in the market, you can determine what a long-term employee will end up in terms of total wealth creation, in terms of their wages and their capital wage when it comes time to retire. That allows you to do a lot of very interesting planning. Another interesting thing about this model is it's a very well-versed model. There's lots of corporate law, there's lots of contract law that applies to the way these things operate. It's not a worker cooperative, it's a corporation. It has a board, it has governance, it has all of the rules and laws that exist. And because of that, its implementation here in this country has been very easy, very well facilitated by the legal and banking community. The reason that I'm recommending it for the implementation of Richard's idea is that it solves a couple of problems that I think exist today and will exist in a greater degree in the future. And that is, you not only want to put these workers to work, the idle workers, but you want to ensure that they have, one, a living wage and a secure retirement. It's not dependent upon the state coming back after somebody's worked for 25 years and then paying out support services. This is actually taking the capital appreciation of the business that they build and helping them secure their retirement benefits. A couple of statistics. Those businesses in this country, there's about 4,000 of them that are 100% employee-owned under the tax code. Those businesses as a category compared to their peers have 5 to 7 times the account balances for the retiree cohorts as do their competitors. 5 to 7 times the amount of retirement benefits. In addition to that, they pay the living wage and other health care benefits. So it's a powerful model. So my proposition here is if you wanted to implement this idea and other ideas, the way that I would do it is by structuring it in an employee-owned framework. There is a model that exists in our country that can be exported, but it doesn't have to be exported. You could buy a U.S.-based business and implement this in Greece. It is I think it's a very powerful model that speaks to what the immediate needs are today, and that is to put people to work. Because it's a service-based business, as we said earlier, they are more easily organized, they're more easily financed, they're more easily grown than capital-intensive or intellectual property-intensive businesses. So I think it's a natural, I think it's something that should be seriously considered. And the reason why it's important, again, in this audience here, is the sponsorship from a foundation. The people, the capital sources that are likely to do this are not private equity sources, they're not venture capital sources, they're foundation sources. That's what's going on in this country today. They're social investing principally funded by foundations that want to forward this economic model of employee ownership. And they're also being self-funded by owners who are retiring, and because there are certain tax advantages to this structure under the U.S. tax code, there is a preference for selling businesses on a competitive basis, whatever the value of the business. It's more tax advantage if it's sold into an ESOP, employee ownership trust, than if it was sold to a third party. So if there's any questions or issues, that's basically my my idea.
Thank you. We'll be taking questions at the end. Now we'll be hearing from Ms. Leia Zanola from the ILO. Thanks.
I think I stay here. Is it on?
Yes, it should be.
Can you hear me? Okay. So first of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this event to having invited the International Labour Organization. Is it not on? So? Okay.
Yeah.
So actually, I'm representing the Skills and Employability branch of the Employment Policy Department. And there is my colleague, Pierre Laliberté, here is there in the back, who was working on social economy, also related to Greece and other crisis countries. I'm actually here instead of Michael Ascherman, who is a senior specialist in skills development systems, and he couldn't come, unfortunately. The two of us are very much involved in technical cooperation, so we are also not in research, but in technical cooperation, and both of us have been to Greece in order to discuss possible ILO support with the Greek partners. So many thanks, Mr. Freeman, for this inspiring presentation, and Mr. May for this response. I will not comment on the capital side, but I will say something about job creation and SME growth, and about the tourism sector as well. And I will try to link this with what we are proposing for Greece. So I will again talk about skills. And I'm doing that because I'm convinced that skills development should go in parallel with job creation and job growth. Although the skills mismatch is often overplayed and misused as an overall explanation for the current jobs crisis, it is still true that we should pay attention to how to fill the skills gap, especially when we are thinking in a long-term perspective. Many SMEs report to have difficulties in finding skilled or adequately skilled workers, and we heard that also from Greek employers' organizations. In order to fill in current and future job vacancies, a joint effort is needed to improve both skills matching and skills development. Many things have already been said, especially in session 1 when we were talking about apprenticeships, but let me look at it from an ILO perspective. We are convinced that, as in all labor market-related issues, tripartite social dialogue between government, workers, and employers' representatives must be the starting point for enhancing skills matching to labor market needs. Accordingly, the concerned ministries and public institutions must be in regular contact with professional organizations. Social dialogue needs to be institutionalized, not only on national, but also on sectoral level. This includes the establishment of appropriate communication channels and consultation and negotiation procedures. And it includes defining the roles and responsibilities of the different partners. I'm happy to say that this process has already been launched in Greece with support of the ILO. We are working together with the Greek Employment Service, OAED. Ms. Theodorido is here as well. So we are working with them and the social partners on establishing social dialogue, also related to skills development and apprenticeships. When it comes to vocational training, employers must be in the driving seat. It is them who know which skills are needed on the labor market. Therefore, they must be involved, together with workers' representatives, in designing vocational training programs and in certification. And we are convinced that they should engage in training delivery as well, and in financing at some point. There is evidence that in-company training makes sense for the employers too. We heard this already. But I would like to mention that 30 to 40% of SMEs in Switzerland, that's the country where I'm from, are offering apprenticeships positions. And it is also worth to mention that employers pay their apprentices. Employers do engage in training and are willing to pay for it because apprentices contribute to the company's productivity, resulting in most cases in a positive return on investment for the host companies. And even if they don't achieve a net benefit, employers get tailor-made employees, can save recruitment costs, or choose from a pool of highly qualified persons. The more companies train, the bigger this pool is, obviously. So when introducing apprenticeship systems, we therefore strongly advise to concentrate first on 1 or 2 sectors with growth and job potential. Based on discussions in Greece and on an assessment of McKinsey, we proposed starting with the food production and processing sector. That's a sector we heard several times that it has potential. We actually also thought about the tourism sector because it's very obvious that there is potential too. However, other actors are already involved in this in skills development in this sector, notably the Germans. So we decided to leave this to them. From a skills perspective, tourism is very interesting because it offers young university graduates from a various range of subjects the possibility to use their skills. And only relatively few additional training would be needed. So for example, if we think about history, language skills, even architecture, art, culture, so all these subjects can be used in the tourism sector and are very valuable. It is, however, not possible to talk about the tourism sector without addressing the quality aspect of jobs. So we need to be cautious that growth does not increase decent work deficits. And just to keep in mind, low-skilled, low-quality jobs are not necessarily filled with domestic youth, as they are often overqualified with respect to theory, but at the same time lack practical experience and applied knowledge. It is therefore necessary to also invest in quality and higher skilled jobs and in targeted quality vocational training, which combines school and work-based learning. Only then young people will be able to directly enter these growth jobs and to benefit from decent employment in the long term. Mr. Freeman, you were talking about luxury tourism. So luxury tourism is indeed a chance to invest in vocational training, because in luxury tourism you need highly qualified staff. That was something which was mentioned to us when we talked in Greece to SETE, the tourism association. And obviously it would make much sense to introduce there in the tourism sector apprenticeship systems as well. So let's see what the Germans are doing. While not being an immediate solution to the employment problem, quality apprenticeships are offering this and are thus an investment in the future. They effectively increase the employability of young people and smoothen the transition from school to work. We have already heard this several times. Combining theoretical, practical, social, and entrepreneurial skills, they prepare apprentices for the world of work, be it as skilled employees or entrepreneurs. In addition, quality apprenticeships ensure decent work as they are regulated based on a sound legal framework and on negotiations between the government, employers, and workers. So last but not least, I would like to say that the International Labour Conference in 2012, at the International Labour Conference in 2012, our constituents called on the ILO to take a leadership role in addressing the youth unemployment crisis and to facilitate mutual learning and mobilize partnerships. So we from the ILO Skills and Employability branch, together with our colleagues from other units and departments, are happy to exactly doing that. We are keen to put our expertise at the disposal of our constituents and to join forces for the sake of youth employability and employment in Greece on a European level and beyond. And we already started to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So we can take questions for all or any of our panelists. We'll start in the back. The first person who raised their hand there. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Alexander Lamnidis. I'm the General Manager of the Confederation of Greek Industries of Tourism. So I'd like to say that I've heard with great interest what has been said. Of course, your presentation was a different world to the presentations before. So it's good to know that there are two worlds. And now, the idea is, I'd like to say that according to McKinsey, that has done a study for SETE, which is the Confederation of Greek Tourism, we have a strategic plan for 2020. Probably we are the only sector that has a definite strategic plan, and we know exactly where we want to go. Having said that, I can say that I can underline that some of the things you've said are not really new. I mean, we do target China. we do target Russia, and certainly we do target the rest of Europe that is part of us. Therefore, we can never forget the fact that French and Britons have been coming for hundreds of years to Greece. I'd like to say that with different countries, even though your model is rather interesting, with different countries, we have different problems. For example, you probably do not know that we have Schengen visa that has to be obtained in order for someone to enter into the European Union. And the fact is that it's not easy to get a Schengen visa. And as far as China is concerned, we do have a visa issue that cannot really be multiplied beyond certain limits. As far as Russia is concerned, I'd like to say, and several other countries, I'd like to say that something that is probably not known on this floor is that SETE has been contributing with funds in conjunction with the Foreign Ministry of Greece in order to have people employed in the different consulates to help in the visa process in order to speed up the process. Therefore, we do that already in different countries with our own funding in order to speed up the process and in order to have more tourists being able to come in. But we do not forget the fact that there are some limitations and constraints in the whole, if you like, procedure, because we do belong to Europe and we do have to abide by certain Schengen rules. Now, as far as the ILO is concerned, I'd like to say that we are in touch with them over the training and, if you like, developing skills mode of the sector. We do need that, and we do, as of now, we are targeting high-level tourism. We do not forget, though, that this is a lengthy process, and just for your information, I'm saying that we will be needing between 1.5 to 2 billion euros per year from now until 2020, and this will be 2 billion euros per year invested in infrastructure in order to get to the numbers that we are discussing. Therefore, and by the way, Professor, your numbers were correct, because McKinsey study talks about 150 to 300,000 new jobs until 2020. Having said that, we need to invest the kind of money that I've mentioned before, so we try to convince the government to move in this direction in order to be able to bring in more tourists, because some of the older airports of Greece, for example, have had a problem due to the fact that they have reached their limits. So we cannot really get more people because we have yet another problem. And the other problem is the fact that we have a limited season period. Therefore, you have an extremely high usage of your infrastructure over certain months of the year, whereas you do not have the usage you need over the rest of the year. So one of the targets is to extend, if you like, the seasonal period in order to be able to accommodate for more growth. You see, I'm saying all that just to aid the process and for you to understand as to what has been happening up to now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great. So we'll take a question next. Someone has a question? Thank you. Right in the middle there.
Hi. I'm in venture capital in Greece, and I have a question for Mr. May. I think the general concept that you outline is very interesting for Greece. But there is a structural problem. It is the size of businesses. I assume, even though you talk about SMEs, that you have a certain threshold above which workers can feel that they have invested in their future if they are owners of the business. If you're talking about businesses of 5 people, for example, I assume that they cannot find that this gives them very much security in an horizon of 30 years. Therefore, they have to be fairly sizable and fairly stable businesses. Now, in our business, we encourage even startups to have ESOPs. However, we know that for most employees in the startups, the ESOPs will end up probably being worth nothing. A few of them will make it big, but for most of them, it will not really be security for the old age. So, can you give me a sense of above which threshold of size you think this makes sense as an instrument of lifetime security?
Yes, everybody clearly hear the question. Sort of, what's the threshold size? The way that I describe it is you know, in the individual circumstances, you'll identify it. In our circumstances here in the States, I look at a business, they're SME businesses that have some institutional strength. In other words, they have an accounting department, they manage their own operating and financial statements. And typically, in a business like a tourism-based business, that's a business with probably 50 plus people in it. And we don't get involved in startups. I know that's a very, very difficult field because just assembling the skill sets. So typically, we go into businesses that are changing ownership but have scale, and we invest in them, and we institute this employee ownership structure. And in the States here, it's much easier to do that because of the tax regimens, and put third-party capital in and actually get market rates of return. But at the end of the day, the employees in management will own the business. So I would say in the level of business that you're talking about, we would look at an established business with probably 50 plus employees as being the minimum that would be of interest.
Yes, then we'll start moving to the front of the room. I see lots of questions.
Yes, I would like to make a comment on what has been presented. I'm also from the ILO, Pierre La Liberté.
Okay, we'll keep our comments brief so that we can allow some audience interaction. Thank you.
Absolutely. But I think it's quite relevant to what was said because it may come to you as a surprise, but the trade unions in Greece have actually have shown interest in doing exactly what you're talking about. Maybe not in the same modality, though, because they've been more pursuing the kind of like co-op, model, at least so far. But at the very least, they've solicited us at the ILO to provide some technical knowledge on this. And of course, at this point, when it's primarily, of course, to preserve jobs. And so it's from their vantage point, quite a change in paradigm. Moving from a collective bargaining adversarial sort of thing to saying, okay, can we make this, can we keep this going? And of course, there's tons of enterprises that are failing because of lack of cash flow. So the opportunities to basically do this in a viable sort of way seems actually not so far-fetched. However, the problem, of course, the problem that applies to all the private sector in Greece applies to those type of ventures as well. The fact of the matter is that now there's no credit available, and there's not even and when it comes to you don't even have microfinance in Greece. Unless something changed very recently. So this in terms of the enabling condition. Is also a key part if you want a sustainable model here. And of course there are as always problems with the legal framework. But I just want to say that the minds are already somewhat ready for this, and so maybe there's a way to pursue this.
Yeah, let me just briefly comment on that. One is, by the way, the trade union issues are probably not terribly different than the trade union issues in Greece or here. There's often an adversarial relationship. We completed a transaction last year with a trade union program in the retail grocery store chain. There's about 2,000 workers that now own the retail chain. It's a viable business. It wasn't failing and so forth. But the union basically stepped in to do exactly what you said. We want to have an ownership interest and help build this and also maintain our membership because this is a growing business. The other credit issue is the one that I'm trying to emphasize and get across. I mean, one of the things I'd love the foundation to do is to solve the credit problem, either through a direct investment or through a guarantee, but it has to be very viable. And by the way, I'm also saying there are 4 or 5 foundations in this country that are doing that right now in this sector in this country to form more employee ownership.
Question here, and then we'll move in this direction.
Hi, my name is Mirta Xanthopoulou. I work at the Foundation's office in Athens. A question on the employee participation schemes, which, I mean, apart from the lack potentially of actual gains for the employees, as Mr. Doxiadis said, perhaps even the alignment of interests is important in this case. So even if you achieve that, that's important. But I mean, I'm sure there's a debate in terms of the employee participation in the decision-making of the companies, and I'm wondering what your views are on that.
On the decision-making?
Decision-making, yes,
Yeah,
apart from the stock ownership or whatever.
Okay, the corporate form is important. So these are not cooperatives. In other words, there's not one person, one vote, and they are liquid corporations. In other words, people matriculate through their ownership, they retire, they get their shares paid out, and others allocated. So the corporations are set up with independent boards. There is a trust in the U.S. in order to manage one of these ownership. There is also a dual fiduciary duty for a trustee that looks after the corporate board actions for the beneficiaries, for the employees. So there's really 2 overseeing functions, but it operates just like a regular corporation. They have a board of directors, they have operating plans, management are held accountable to those operating plans. The employees have the ability to vote their shares. In certain cases, and under our law, in certain cases, they can vote for the board members. They can vote. There's a company that I'm working with, have been working with for a long time. They elect their CEO. There's about 1,400 employees, and they manufacture open die forgings. They're a very, very successful business. But every 5 years, the board produces a script of people who would stand in, or ballot of people, and the employees elect their CEO. Pretty unusual, but the corporate governance issues are ones that are well studied and well established here that make these companies very successful.
There might be a future in Greece for this type of scheme, but at least in shipping, I think some stock ownership schemes do exist already, as a comment.
We have a question here. Hold on for the microphone. Thanks.
Just wrapping up the debate so far concerning the SOP and the versus cooperative lines, because my background is social economy, so I'm more into that. I think that actually it is a dividing line that has to be highlighted when we're talking about collective ownership schemes. And the decision-making structure has to do a lot with that. So I think that the trade union point of view that there should be decision-making change in the structure if there is, if actually the employees are bailing out the employer is a great focus. And concerning that, Professor Freeman, it really struck me that you included as an example the Mondragon experience under a SOP, because as far as I'm concerned, and one can talk many years about the Mondragon experience, but I mean, it was a highly cooperative structure that expanded to a community in the Basque Country. So I don't really see how it fits with the ESOP model, because it was a cooperative from the beginning, developing cooperatives between cooperatives, a cooperative university, and so on and so forth. So I can't really see how it is related to the ESOP model that we're talking about in this regard. It was included under your examples.
I mean, yes, of course it was. It's widely viewed as one of the most successful ESOP or employee ownership schemas. And it's true that it is a big conglomerate. And they have operations in Brazil, and they have operations in China. And they don't follow fully their employee ownership part, or else the Spanish workers would be outvoted by the Brazilian and Chinese. But they do operate, you still get paid incentive pay in your other operations. So there's nothing, in the US we don't have a giant community created or community connected employee ownership thing. We have more individual companies. The John Lewis, which is a complete trust owned, they then developed the Waitrose. There's no reason why they couldn't keep developing. They could develop their own bank if they wanted to. So I think the Mondragon is clearly employee owned. They'll have some differences from the ESOP, and the fact that they make their university. That's, you know, you can do whatever you want with your monies as workers or as owners.
It's not good to go like that. I mean, but my difference was not a matter of scale or the existence of the university. It was the horizontal decision-making structure, the small gap between the greatest and smallest salary within the cooperative, and all these features that define the cooperative as a special identity. So that was my main argument. And I would also like to ask Richard May concerning the model of cases, for example, where the company is failing because of mismanagement, not of reduced profitability, and whether there, in these cases, you have thought of like a completely employee buyout on cooperative lines. I mean, have you thought of that path along the way, or it's something different?
Thank you.
I'm not sure I got all of the question, but if I think the gist of it was, is this still an applicable model if the company is failing because of management? It has been a successful model in a number of instances, but it's also been a failure in a number of instances. The question as to whether the business is failing because of poor management or just a lousy market. You know, the difficulty of implementing an ESOP in my mind, or employee ownership in my mind, where there are give-ups in exchange for participation, is the expectations that you would want to set for participation in this trust, and that is that you're giving up this current pay because the future is going to be brighter. That should only be done with a very deep understanding of the economics of the business. And if it is purely a management problem, then there should be viable alternative businesses that are being run by a different set of management that are successful. So I think understanding what the exchange is and making sure that workers are you know, fairly and completely briefed on this. In other words, what is it that we're giving up, and what is it that we expect to get, and what level of confidence do the backers of this organization, who's ever recapitalizing the business, can back those statements? I think is key. But there's a lot of examples of that both working and not working in the States.
Thank you. We'll take our next question. I know there were lots of hands up before. I just want to make sure we get everyone.
I think I will come to a more positive way of thinking. I think we should come to tangible solutions. And that's what Coralia has done. is created in the last 6 or 7 years an ICT cluster formation in 3 distinct areas where Greece can play a role in the international scene. And believe me, in the microelectronics, some of our companies are very well known in the digital analog design, and they are selling their products around the world. Sensor networks are also very high developed areas in Greece. Now, the thing is, the tangible solution is that we have now an ICT cluster with 8,000 people with exports about $200 to $300 million. It's a small amount, but rather it's according to your second point, Richard, we think that this can grow in the billions. Now, my question is, can the foundation and you people who have quite a bit of, I would say, trade name and publicity bring international multinationals to enhance this experiment by creating design centers the same way as I said in the morning, the Bangalore or the Irish experiment. And in order to do that, because of the difficult situation in Greece now, I would say multinationals are not willing to come to a country with so many problems in, let's say, taxation and so on and so forth. So can you play the role of the mediator, and your office in Athens can come and see how this experiment runs? And in the European scene, we are very well known as a tangible project. So this is my question. Can you help us in this particular? And if you want more information, I can give you more. I have a file here which I can give to the foundation so that you can see what we are doing. Thank you.
I don't know if I can be of help, but if I can, I'd like to.
We'll take a question there in the back. Haris, there's a question.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Marie Antonakis. I want to thank the foundation and all of the esteemed thought leaders that are here today. I'm from the Perimeter Institute in Canada. So I had some questions about the idea of tourism in Greece. And from this morning, what I had understood was the highest youth unemployment is from the ages of 24 to 29, and that Greece, in fact, is very much a country of high education. And so my question is, how does the translation of an economy that is essentially the majority of it are people who necessarily don't have to have a lot of education. It's more of it has been in North America anyway, an entry point economy in terms of tourism. How does that actually address the issues that we are facing today? And I'm thinking it's because it's part of a larger picture, but I am concerned about Greece being a country that is seen as a place that has a lot of tourism and not enough industry, not enough interesting and capital human capital being addressed to technology, etc. Thanks.
Let me just say that there are many countries now that have lots of educated youths, where you look at the industry structure and you say, this isn't maybe what we thought of years ago. The most striking of these is the most educated country now in the world is Korea. Korea is, it's about half the economy at least, is small and medium enterprises, mom and pop stores in the service sector. So I don't think there's any inconsistency between having reasonably educated young people. Tourist businesses are businesses like any other and need management skills and knowledge. And I think because of the culture component and the dealing with people from different cultures, that you'd be much better off if you're running a tourist operation and you're going to have the Chinese tourists come, you better have your people speak Chinese, and you better have them be able, if they're going to be dealing with historic sites and so on, to be doing, the discussion. The tourist industry is there's a lot of, we know there's a lot of less skilled work in the cleaning and so on. Though even there, that's fine. But even there, as the cleaning, you're going to have robots cleaning places in a while, and you're going to need people with knowledge, or they could be apprentice people. I don't mean educated only university types. I think that's been clear from everybody. But I would not regard the tourist industry as sort of, gee, these are just low skill jobs for people. And the unemployment rate in Greece also among the young, less educated people, that's got to be dealt with as well too. So I think it's capable of doing both.
I just want to say very quickly that you're making an excellent point in saying that there is a very strong connection between the tourist industry and the ability to create jobs for younger people, for younger generations. And there is a study actually that's coming out, it came out today in Washington. It was supported by Hilton Worldwide, and it is focusing exactly on this particular issue, how the leisure industry fits perfectly the needs of a younger generation and how it can provide major support, employment support for younger people. And actually we're going to have someone who has worked on this study here tomorrow and will bring us some of the results, because I think it's very, very important. Thank you.
One more question. Two more, Dean Goodman and here in the front, and then we'll move on to our next session. Thank you.
Yeah, hi. Couple things about what you just said. I spoke to the board of the training board of the National Restaurant Association here, and these top people, they all started from very low level in the restaurant industry and built themselves up and so on. So that could be part of that as well. One area that I think sounds, I don't know, I just throw this out as another idea, is in the area of special communities. That is the building of new communities and of perhaps even homes that foreigners might be interested in buying, or fixing up existing ones, where you would have a lot more chance. It's also a labor-intensive activity. It's one that involves a lot of learning in terms of electrical and all these other things. And some of that could subsequently even be, even if the economy were to pick up, some of it could be used in terms of enhancing existing housing. People always want to add another room or improve their the energy efficiency of their homes and all that sort of thing. So, when Jeffrey Sachs talked about some sort of experiment that allowed for a particular area to be exempt from certain things, it would seem to me like if you allowed for that and maybe cut some of the red tape in terms of zoning and that sort of thing, that you could stimulate a lot of jobs. It would, and they would be somewhat different, and it would be sustained too, because people would either keep coming every year, or they might rent their house and lower the rents.
Great. Final question in the back. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So I'm a scientist, and I took 3 semesters of calculus as an undergraduate, and I could not differentiate or integrate an equation today. But I know it had a really profound effect on the way I see the world and how I count and what I do. I took physical chemistry at Cornell, and I actually even got an A. And I couldn't do any physical chemistry today, but it really profoundly affected the way I see the world. So to the point about education, and we're going to talk about agriculture tomorrow, and I'll just give a little preview. We're seeing kids with bachelor's degrees, with master's degrees, I know a couple with PhDs, coming into agriculture as youngsters and learning to farm and being successful. And is a PhD a requirement for being a successful agricultural producer or entrepreneur in the food sector? No. But does it have an effect on how they succeed and how they go about their work? Absolutely. So I think the issue of education is one that is multi-layered, deep, and truly powerful. So let's not lose sight of that. And especially in Greece, with such a well-educated population, it's a massive waste not to use that.
Okay, thank you all. I think we have to close the session just to make sure we stay on track with the time. We hope that the questions that you do have, you'll continue asking during the breaks. And we'll look forward to welcoming everyone in the next session. Thank you.